No mai haere mai. Welcome to Climate Kōrero, brought to you by Climate Action Tai Tokoro, the podcast where we dive deep into the challenges, obstacles, and perspectives shaping our changing climate. Join us as we explore how communities across Tai Tokoro, Aotearoa, and beyond are adapting, growing, and finding strength in the face of our changing climate. From local heroes to global movements, we kōrero with those on the front lines of sustainability, innovation, and resilience. Whether you're a climate advocate or just curious about the world around you, there's a place for you in our conversation. So grab a cuppa, settle in, let's talk climate.
Kia ora whānau. My name's Catherine Murupainga Aitken no Ngāti Kuri me Te Raroa, and I have the privilege today of being with Hamish Clueard, who's a well-known personality around these parts. Hamish, you are based over in Tutukaka there. Why don't you tell us about the mahi that you do in the marine environment space? I know you're with a Trust Ocean Spirit,
Yes.
Te Wairua, Te Moananui, amongst other things. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Okay, well, I come from the Tutukaka Coast, and I belong to Te Wairiki Hapu, Ngāti Taka, Takitai, and Patuharakeke Hapu. So Ngāti Wai's my iwi. And I'm Hamish Clueard, and I actually live at Matapauri, but I spend all my time at Tutukaka working on our different projects there, which is the Kelp project, which is a regeneration or a rehabilitation, actually, of the harbour because of basically overfishing has caused a lot of problems, but not only overfishing, also development, deforestation of that catchment area for the Tutukaka Harbour, and it's caused us a lot of problems in the harbour, but also up and down the coast. So I am one of the founders of Te Wairua or Te Moananui Ocean Spirit Trust, and with 5 other people. And so we have a vision for the Tutukaka Harbour in particular, and our rohi, which goes from about a mile south of Pāharakeke, which is in the Nganguru Bay, and up to Second Gable, which is halfway up between Tutukaka and Matapauri area.
Right.
And out to, of course, it's a designated rohi, so it goes out to the 200-mile economic zone. And at the moment, we have a temporary closure out to 3 miles, which is 186A temporary closure.
That's
for
a
fishing.
legislative
Yeah.
reference there.
Yeah, these are all legislation, parts of the legislation tools we can use to try and protect our rohi. It's not going that well. Some parts of it are, and some parts of it, it's a hard one to manage, in fact. Not just because of the rohi moana, but the 186A is it's not as easy as it is made out to be to manage.
And we could probably drill down into that specific mechanism for protection, that section 186A rohi moana protection.
Yeah, it's in the rohi moana, yeah.
Could I just circle back to the kelp nursery?
Yes.
Because I have a particular interest in it, because we actually visited your nursery one time,
Right.
me and my
Yeah.
husband, Jeff. It was an amazing setup, very fascinating, and so much in a small amount of space. Like you're working in this a
Tiny.
container, and you had your setup, the little boxes there with the water flowing through it, and but it has to be all calibrated just right, because the little kelp, what do you call them? They're plants, but they start off as...
Well, we call them kelpies, but
kelpies.
Or kelp babies, but
Very technical
they're
name.
actually... where shall I start with it? Shall I start with how we get them?
Yes, so the reason why the kaupapa, why you started at all, you alluded to it. It was something about like the marine environment, you know. It's
so
under threat. Or
what we've ended up with is a degraded coastline. That includes the harbours and the rivers for various reasons. One of them is overfishing. So me, having spent most of my working life as a commercial fisherman, I started noticing, well, I noticed all the way through, but the industrial fishing is it's not such a good thing, really, for the environment, because it's industrial, and you fish every day because you're paid to, or you know, you have depending on what sort of a deal you have with the fishing company, or even if you had your own boat, you have to keep it working. And so it's non-stop pressure on our environment, which, depending on what sort of fishing method you're doing, especially if it's bottom trawling or even purse seining or Danish seining, anything like that, it causes damage. Scallop dredging, for example, is another one.
sounds so destructive.
Yeah, they are. They're quite destructive fishing methods. So I started noticing when I was fishing in Australia, actually catching prawns, that we were actually destroying a whole ecosystem, because you know, when you're catching prawns, unless you're up outside a river when it's flooding, or up in the Gulf of Carpentaria, where you can catch pure prawn, most of the rest of the time, probably 90% of the rest of the time, you're catching a lot of bycatch.
Yes.
Which is not all good bycatch. Well, it's not all edible bycatch. Some of it is, you know, sponges and fans and stuff like that, and corals and all that sort of stuff, which, you know, you don't need to destroy, really, to get your food.
Kia ora. And how long ago was this? Far back? In the,
I started commercial fishing probably in the early 70s.
oh my gosh. And you were making these observations fairly early into
straight away,
straight away
Yeah.
in the 70s.
Mainly because I was brought up in Tutukaka as a kid, and we were taught to not make such a huge impression on our environment by when we took kina or any fish, that if we moved a rock, we had to put the rock back in the same place that it came from, you know. And so I had quite a feeling for our marine environment quite early. So when I got to Australia and started commercial fishing,
Must have been a culture shock then.
it was a huge culture shock, and it was industrial fishing, very destructive. So, you know, we started in Moreton Bay, just off Brisbane, which is quite a big area, that had been dredged up for probably 4 generations. When the first settlers first got to Australia, they started straight away, you know, harvesting the resources that they'd probably been harvesting in Europe and other places.
And of course, your vessel is competing against so many others. I don't even know how many.
Yeah, just in the one creek that I was working out of, there was 100 other vessels.
That sounds a lot.
It was massive, and that was just a small part of that Moreton Bay area.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then we moved out onto the coast when we, at certain times of the year, when the cyclones had come through and the rivers would start flooding, we'd move out onto the coast because the prawns were bigger and there's more of them. And we started trawling up and down the coast there. And then in the winter time, we'd move up to the Gulf of Carpentaria and work all that area up there, and
It's surprising we still have the remnants of the biodiversity today that we have, with all of those forces acting against them.
Yeah.
Extractive industry being as it is.
But I still keep in touch with some of the people there, and they say they can still catch prawns in Moreton Bay.
Oh,
So that's one thing
that's interesting.
yeah.
Not to the same degree.
No, not to the same degree, but
But-
it's because of the way that prawns regenerate. They need floodwaters to get washed out. They actually get washed out of the mangroves, and that's where they breed, up in the mangroves and right up the rivers.
Which raises another issue about, the importance of mangrove ecologies for a whole
Yes.
host of species,
Yeah.
marine species. And yet we see a lot of, there's a lot of planting of mangroves going on around the world at the moment, but there's also a lot of destruction, like on our back doorstep for that new
Yeah.
marina up the
Yeah.
road. But, I'll just put a pin on that.
There's more
but-
destruction of mangroves going on than there is
The net,
replanting.
outcome is more destruction than there is growth and,
Yeah.
supporting those ecologies.
Like especially around in Moreton Bay. I'll just use Moreton Bay because I know what happened there from years ago, from the 70s. And the Brisbane Airport, for example, is built on a mangrove.
Yeah.
Environment.
Infrastructure. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're always eyeing up the coastlines and the
Which
coastal
is huge,
areas. Yeah.
It's a huge area of mangroves gone for the airport.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had this like schizophrenia about culturally about I was brought up with these values,
Yeah,
to
it was-
protect, and then I come into this extractive industry and I'm just seeing all of this, destruction happening. It must have been pretty hard. So that played a part, and I mean we're looking at this kelp nursery today and how
Yeah.
that's taken off, and there's some bridge there.
Yeah, well, it
Between how
was.
you got from there to there.
I was always in conflict with it.
Yeah.
And it's leading up to the kelp thing is I also spent time up in the Pacific fishing for tuna. And I started noticing there that there was glitter in the water. And I couldn't figure it out for a while, and you're always so tired when you're industrial fishing that you think, oh, glitter, But anyway, one day I woke up during the day and I dropped over a white bucket on 100 feet of line because I wanted to see, I was interested in the glitter, what was the glitter, but also how far the visibility was. So I threw the bucket over and, of course, the glitter was microplastics.
Microplastic, yeah.
Yeah. Which I could see easily once I threw the white bucket over. So
Oh my goodness, getting out.
yeah, so and that sort of started making me think even harder about
What were your
what
mates
the
on
hell
the
we're
on the
doing.
boats thinking and doing? Were you were the only one who had the superpower of curiosity, or were others like with you on this? Were they like, yeah, mate, what's going
Yeah.
on?
Well, I met some guys from Niue, right? Because New Zealand has quite an influence at Niue, and they actually work for DOC, and I got a fishing license for their area, which borders onto Tonga, and I had to have observers on board. So I had a DOC observer on board, and they were really careful about what we were doing, and actually taught us quite a bit, this one observer, about what we were doing with our plastics on board. For example, when we cut a line and then rejoin it, and you cut off a little bit of plastic line, little bits this long, because you do the knot and you have a bit sticking out there and a bit sticking out there.
What do you do with that little bit of plastic?
Okay, they said you can't drop those in the water.
Yeah, you multiply that by how many boats there are doing the same thing, how many times they do it, that aggregates to a lot of... fishing nets are one of the major pollutants
there's
in
another
the
thing
oceans,
there,
right?
repairing fishing nets, cutting the knots and washing it all overboard, it's all adds to it.
Adds up.
But these little bits of plastic that we were cutting off from 100 kg line, they're quite sharp, and fish just see them as something to eat.
Yeah.
So they eat them, and they eat a lot of them, and they think it's food.
And it's,
And also does damage to their intestine. Yeah.
Sure.
Stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I started to wake up. It took a long time, though. It took a long time to wake up.
And you might be
to it.
stereotypical of just, that a person in society, it takes time for them to see what they're seeing, feel what they're feeling about it, and then be motivated to take action. But before you can even be motivated to take action, you've got to think, well, what can I do?
Yeah.
That sits with somebody for a while. What even can I do against this juggernaut of the system or the industry? There's a few hoops a person in their mind, their heart and mind, has to jump through before they get disturbed and then take some sort of action.
Well, it's also your income, like fishing, industrial fishing is an income for a lot of people. And the last boat I was on, there were 10 of us to look after. And working in the islands with island crew and Chinese crew, you're sort of treated as the father when you're the captain. And so you've got all those families to look after. And they're big families, even the Chinese families are quite big.
Right, so that's something I didn't appreciate before. You were actually captaining these vessels. You weren't just a deckhand or anything like that. You were actually the matua, the tuakana on the boat.
Yeah, and the crew looks up to you, and so you're looking after not only the crew, which is there was 6 people plus myself and an observer. Sometimes there's a little bit less, but mostly 8 people, but at home, they've got families. Those islanders, they've got big families. Yeah. So you're looking after all those families as well.
It's a bit of a weight to carry around, but it also it's just a fact that you are aware of it and you appreciate that, because I imagine there are some captains out there who may not really care that much.
Yeah, there's
about
all
that.
sorts of people who work out
bag.
there. It's
isn't in any industry.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag of people.
Yeah. I would say, I'm just going to speculate, but I would say, again, some of your cultural upbringing from back home when you were a child growing up, some of the values, that you develop there, that sort of, shapes your leadership
it's
capacity and approach.
It's very whānau orientated. It was we would unload 2 ton of fish every time we came in for the whānau.
You mean just for the families of the...
Yeah, I made sure that 2 ton of fish went straight to the whānau, and I told my boss about it. I said, this is for the families of these guys, and we bought them freezers so that they could freeze it.
Good point.
Because we were away for, up to 2 months sometimes, so that they could put all of this fish into their freezers, keep them going when we weren't there.
Wow. I wonder how many
that sort of stuff.
Companies have captains and crew that operate in that way today.
There are some. I work for a lot of Italians, and when I was in Australia, they are like that. they're very
strong on family and food
orientated.
like us.
Yeah, and also I work for a crowd in Auckland who came from Split in the, what do you call it, the delis, you know. So Simonovic, Ivan.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so Ivan Simonovic, he looked after families. So, you know, every morning he, you know, there's a restaurant down there now called the Kōrero restaurant. Well, that was for the staff originally. So he fed the staff every morning. So when we went to sea for working for Ivan, he would put money in our bank straight away as soon as we untied the ropes and left the wharf. The money went into our banks for all the crew.
Cool.
That
And I
sort
know
of thing.
there's like a variation of that approach that the iwi who are in fishing here in Aotearoa, they have some capacity to get, you know,
Yeah, well, I hope
kaimoana
so.
and
Yeah.
distribute it out to the iwi as well. So there's
Yeah.
kind of a
I hope
flavour
so.
of that.
I've never
still
worked
around.
for iwi fishing companies.
Yeah, I don't know, but
So-
I've been on the receiving end of
Oh,
kai
yeah,
moana
yeah.
back home.
Yeah.
And they had, you know,
Yeah.
Kōrero and all sorts of, you know, kai moana come for a major event.
Well, in our getting back to our rohi moana, we did talk about with the working group that helped set up the. We all worked together to set up the 186A. We've been working on it for years. We talked about a pātaka. So setting up a pātaka to, especially if we're going to stop fishing in a certain area, is setting up a pātaka so people wouldn't have to go fishing, they could come to a pātaka. And we were trying to get the fish off these big fishing companies to put in the pātaka.
So just for our viewers who may not know what a pātaka is,
Well, it's
Give a
a
description of it.
traditional place for storing food.
and you can have them on land as well as, any,
well,
you know,
we were
pātaka
thinking
kai.
of it as being a big freezer just for fish, for kaimoana, you know. And it sort of took off a bit, but not really. I mean, you know, not all fishing companies are big, rich fishing companies. Some of them are small fishing
And they're
companies.
just getting
Yeah.
by, cutting even, whatever, breaking
Yeah, and
even.
to fill up a pātaka for one hapu it would be quite a big thing, you know. And they would have to account for all that fish that they put into the pātaka as well. So there is another thing happening, and it's been going for a while, and it's just being rejuvenated at the moment. As you know, talking about pātaka, is fish heads for free. So it's happening in South Auckland at the moment, quite a big way, and it used to happen up here, and it's just getting started up here again. So
Wow.
when amateur fishermen go fishing, usually they only want the fillets. So it's an app on your phone, and you can tell them that you want fish heads or fish frames, and you can organise with them for you to go down and pick them up when they come into the ramp.
Oh, that's
So-
awesome.
So that uses the whole fish, you know.
Yeah, everything gets used. There's no
Yeah.
waste. So I have an idea vaguely that certain parts of the fish are good for your garden, because I'm vegetarian, so I wouldn't eat the fish. Of course, some people think fish heads are the best part of the fish. It's a delicacy. They
yeah.
love it,
Yeah.
which is all good. But also you can just put, is that true? You can put parts of the fish. So even if you don't get into
yeah.
like making kai out of it, there's other ways you can use those.
Yeah,
as
you
like
can
a
use it for your garden.
resource. Yeah, just chuck it on
It's
somehow.
good for the garden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So that might be something. So that's just in Auckland. That doesn't come this far north of, because there's a lot of people who fish up here, and I imagine
Yeah, no, there's lots of it up here.
that
It's
particular
just,
app reaches all over the
yeah,
country.
The
Networked.
fish heads for free, it actually slowed down there for a while, but the guy who started it is Matt Watson. He's a personality on TV, fishing programs and that sort of thing. So he started this thing along with some people from Legacy, which is another group of people who they're an organisation of amateur fishermen, Legacy is. But there's also a lot of science background people in there as well, and they do some good stuff. So, with what's happening to our fisheries at the moment, they are quite vocal about what's happening in the Gulf, for example.
Yes, Hauraki.
Hauraki, yeah.
Yeah. I just think it's neat how people can come up with a creative idea, turn it into, well, in this case, an app that makes it really accessible by the masses. So that's what we need, whānau, is more like creative ideas that are going to help reduce waste, and at the same time, that resource, there is really no such thing as waste in the bigger scheme of things. There's just we haven't found what to do with this resource that we've created.
Yeah.
And there's, one person's rubbish, or what's that saying, is another person's treasure. Or something like that. So if we can think creatively like that, do more of those sorts of things, it would really help. Yeah. And so getting back to this nursery of yours.
Okay, so with all of that fishing over the years and noticing the destruction and what was happening in the ocean, I met a guy from out on the coast, Glenn Edney, who had written a book called The Ocean is Alive, and I read that book and I contacted him because there were some things in it that I'd been thinking about for a long time. And it was his thing was basically about whales, but and I'd been working amongst whales when I was long-lining up in the Pacific, and whales were a nuisance, like to us, because they used to eat our tuna on the line.
I'm having to zip my mouth, you can tell.
Yeah. But I had also, when I was in Australia, I'd also spent 10 years counting whales on this island that I lived on. So we used to count the humpbacks as they came up from Southern Ocean. They used to come really close to Stradbroke Island, and so we used to count them.
You were doing that as like a hobby or a scientific data collection?
I was still fishing at the time, but it was I'd met some guys from the University of Queensland who wanted to come over and count whales. So I said, you can come and stay at my place and we'll count whales. So we counted them. So, in a migration season, we'd count about 1,800 whales per year going past Stradbroke during the daytime. But during the nighttime, they'd be going past as well. So we couldn't count those. So it might have been double that amount. Nowadays, the people I keep up with, they say, we're up to 2,200 per day. So, that's an increase.
Yeah, that's kind of counterintuitive to a lot of the information we're hearing about, decline of different marine mammal species. That's really interesting. I don't know if they're moving different locations because they're following food, because we know the ocean currents are changing. And
there's been a lot of people against whaling, and I think that's helped a bit.
Helped.
And it's not as big a thing as it used to be, killing whales.
That's awesome to hear.
Yeah, and they're getting looked after more than what they used to be looked after in the old days. Like on this island that I lived on, there were actually whalers still alive on the island. Yeah.
Wow, that's a bit too close for comfort.
Yeah. So how we get to the kelp then is I met Glenn and we formed a trust because we needed some sort of entity to be able to do what we wanted to do and also convince people that we were legit. We weren't some crackpots wanting to just grow kelp. And in his, he'd spent many years diving at the Pornites, and he'd seen a decline as well, and up and down the coast. And I'd noticed the decline in the kelp beds, kelp forests. And so we thought, well, let's try. And Glenn had devised a monitoring system for the Solomon Islanders to look after their reefs. And so he adapted that same monitoring method to our coastline, and we called it Hauora Moana. And so that's how we started, really. We started with Hauora Moana and encouraging people to come diving with us and have a look at the what was actually happening in the water, rather than looking out over the harbour or out over the coastline and seeing this beautiful surface and everything, which once you got underneath the water, that was not the case. So we started off having these monitoring sessions with, 8 people or so, and we would have, say, 10 tohu to look at when we got in, because what we were concerned about was the mauri of the place.
Right, and by tohu you're talking indicators or metrics
yeah.
or something, eh?
Yeah, like, was there any kelp in the area that we were looking in? Were there any fish living on the area where there was less kelp, or was there more fish living in an area where there was a lot of kelp? And was there enough fish there for the reef, basically? Not for human consumption, because we had a no-take policy.
Kia ora.
And so we were looking at it from the perspective of, is there enough reef fish there, like koura, octopus, anything, to look after the reef? And there wasn't. So that's when we started thinking, well, why isn't there all of these species
And you
there?
knew it wasn't enough because of the experience, the knowledge, the local knowledge, expertise about what it took.
Yeah.
What's the benchmark
What
for a
was a
healthy
healthy-
environment, and
what
they
was
saw
a
it drop
healthy
below
reef?
that,
Yeah.
and so they just said, nah, it's not enough.
Yeah. So we'd have this, we'd go and do this monitoring. It only took about 40 minutes. And then we'd come back, and 8 of us would just discuss what we'd seen, and we'd go through a consensus process of what was the health of the reef. And because of it wasn't just people from the community that used to come diving with us, we were starting to get people from universities coming to dive with us, and also other people that were into science, and or wanting to get into marine science. And so we had these really
A
interesting...
a diverse
Yeah.
community was starting to form.
Yeah, so Glenn had devised this system for the Solomon Islanders, because what was happening up there was you'd get scientists go in there, and they would go in there with all their money, and they would do some research on a special thing, but nothing came back to the islanders for about 3 years.
Right.
So after 3 years, everything has changed
Classic.
so much from when they first did their research that it was pointless.
So it wasn't. So yeah, that's a thought that came to me, was how was the method, the approach that you were taking in that diverse community, that you developed this way of observation and all that. How did that differ from the usual scientific methods that are often used? And you just mentioned something about, and this is an experience that we have had, scientists come in, they do their whatever, looking at things, and then they go, and then there's just radio silence for a long period of time. And by the time they do publish in a journal their findings or whatever, peer-reviewed, so much time has passed.
Yeah.
It's not a responsive way when your environment is, moving day on day.
Yeah.
By the time you actually get the results, something
it's
already happened. It's
way worse.
Yeah, it's
because
just
people go and do their research. I've never been to university, but from meeting the people that I've met in the last 5 years, they write a thesis, and then that has to be reviewed, and then they have to get through their study, and that, so that thesis doesn't hit the
If the timing's all off.
yeah, hit the public domain for about 3 years. Well, you know, the reef is changing on a daily basis, and things need to be done straight away. So with our Hauora moana methodology of monitoring reef, we can have a result in 3 hours.
That's amazing.
Not 3 years.
And when you say you've got a result, I think we might have discussed this, the result that you get doing monitoring in a different kind of way, and also integrating just people's, direct experience. It may not be scientific, like you don't measure it with a ruler or
No.
measuring volume. You're actually just using your direct experience as a
Yeah.
human being, engaging in relationship with the environment, and you're feeling, and you're, matching your perception of what you're seeing with, okay, this is good or this is bad by some degree. But that's not truly, according to Western science, they might argue, that's not really the kind of standard of science that we would
Yeah.
go to. And yet, the result from your approach correlates well with the findings of the actual scientists, like Western
Yeah.
scientists. After 3 years, they finally reveal, the big reveal, of what you came up with doing your very responsive method.
Yeah, well, one of the things is for, say, like a little hapu like us, is that with the results of our surveys or monitoring, we can make a decision, especially now that we've got the 186A in place and we're doing other work as well. We can make a decision in a couple of days about the state of our reef.
And that's what we need. We need decisions
Exactly,
made, really
yeah.
fast turnaround on the decision.
Rather than waiting for the government or the ministry to come in and make those decisions for us, which are not always the right decisions.
Kia ora.
And are not timely. So
So is this a way of, protecting the environment and gathering information and acting on it? It's it's part of a governance model
yeah,
in a way. Has that been picked up in a serious way, like in a scaled up way? But
well,
you
it
think
has.
would be.
It has up in the Solomons because you got all of these people living on a little island, and their their subsistence comes from their reef.
Yeah.
And the coconuts. So if their reef has been overfished by, say the government has let in a whole lot of fishermen, and this has happened up in the
yeah.
Solomons. I was offered a job in the Solomons to go and fish up there. Well, I'd be taking away their kaimoana. And they're not in the equation even. Because it's an industrial thing for the Solomon Island, say, government.
Well, that feels familiar, actually.
And income, So the islanders, and we noticed it on our coast too, like when I was commercial fishing on our coast, I was actually taking kaimoana that my uncles could have gone out and caught. Same thing.
Yep.
So-
I was involved in a case, just by the by, up home in Ahipara some years back, where we had the Ministry of Fisheries come down hard on one of our defenders of our, marine area, our moana, and we had to go to court to protect him. In doing, we were actually protecting our own communities, like you say, access to a thriving environment. We're just trying to, quarantine it off and make sure we had enough for
Look
our
after
local, kāinga. And for that, the government, tried to demonise us and take us down. But we won in the end.
Well,
But you don't want our people going through that.
Yeah. Well, the Tutukaka Harbour used to support all those whānau that lived around the harbour, and when I was a kid, right, you could live out of the harbour. You can't do that now.
Yeah.
You're lucky to get a feed out of the harbour.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, with our surveying method, we have 10 tohu, and they can be anything. You can make them up. it's not just these are the 10 tohu that you must use. For people that know their area, they'll say, okay, well, we'll go and look at this. We might look at, is there enough fish for the reef? Is there enough, any koura? Or is there any octopus? Is there any squid? Are there any, the other little, is there any
Indicator
pori?
species.
And what about the kelp? Is there any kelp? You know, are there any invasive species? So look at all of those things. Go for a dive for 40 minutes, come back, talk about it, and then work out what the health is. And it's quite easy to do, and it's quick, you know. And then the hapu can make, or the community as well as hapu, can make decisions straight away about their reef. Will we put a rahui on? Or I mean, it's hard to get a rahui in our area because there's a lot of Pākehā who are a bit scared of rahui.
So again, the rahui is like, it's like quarantining, it's like putting additional restrictions on that space. So maybe no take or limited.
Well, they think that, okay, we go and put a rahui on and we're the only ones that are going to take any fish from it during the rahui and do, you know, take away their rights. And it's just misunderstanding.
And it's also like, if you're playing a long game, a short rahui for like, how long might you put it on for? It depends, because you have to review.
Well, a season, you know.
A season,
yeah. I mean,
or something like
personally,
that.
I think that fishing should be shut down for 6 months of the year. Completely. Nobody take anything.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit like on land when you're gardening, you know, you're growing your kai, you've got to let the soil rest.
Well, yeah, you should have areas where you let...
moving, rotating and letting your soil, you know, and just plants grow naturally there and let it do its thing, and then you come back to it. It's the same thing. It makes good common sense.
Yeah. So getting back to the kelp thing, so after doing our surveys and monitoring, we decided that, well, what is mostly missing is the kelp beds are missing.
Out Tutukaka Coast.
Everywhere we've discovered.
Everywhere.
From East Cape to North Cape.
Ooh. So what do you think?
Well,
it's a combination of factors.
Than that, actually. Down in Wellington, I mean, there's kelp missing. There's people growing kelp, trying to grow kelp in Wellington.
Wow.
Because their kelp beds are disappearing too.
Well, that's okay. So. People are starting to, seriously recognise. And the cause of that effect is a combination of factors, but are there any standout factors for you? Why is it temperature change in the oceans? Is it getting the alkaline acidity sort of levels are changing?
That's all happening, but mostly it's overfishing.
And the connection with the fish and the kelp, reduction in kelp?
Yeah, the fish need the kelp to live in. It's biodiversity. They need all the things that live in the kelp, and the kelp needs them.
And the kelp needs them to spread the kelp around? Or
well, for example, say kinna, for example, right? So kinna spawn at a certain time of the year. They really fill up with the roe, and then they'll spawn, and then everybody gets a feed. Plus, there's more kinna. Okay, but what's happening now is there's the resident reef fish are degraded to a state where when the kinna spawn, those little fish are not there to eat some of that spawn. So that turns into just kinna everywhere that eats all the kelp.
Right, there's the link.
Millions and millions of little kinna are developing because there's no fish there to eat them. And, say the momo, for example, will just eat the eggs. I mean, momo's got a tiny mouth, can't eat a kinna, but it can eat a lot of egg spawn,
Yeah.
Well, they're not there anymore. They've been caught. They've been gill netted out. So things like that, and plus the Kōrero are gone, and we fished hell out of the coast for everything. We caught a lot of morays. We caught a lot of morays. There was no market for moray, but we couldn't stop catching moray if we were targeting snapper on the coastline.
things like
just
that.
created this huge imbalance.
Imbalance, yeah, in the environment.
Yeah, so we decided from our surveys that that the kelp was missing, so we decided we'll grow kelp.
Focus on that.
And we had some university students and high school students come and do these surveys with us, whose thing when they got to university was how to grow kelp. So that was what they went to university for.
Awesome.
Was to grow kelp. And so we're still working with those two students, and one of them has just finished her master's in kelp growing, and is branching out into kina as well. So we also had the help of Dave Aguirre, who was the professor for kelp and kina at Massey, and so we did it with his blessing, sort of thing, because these two master students were his students.
So that partnership has added value to your what would otherwise have been just a really localised project. And so in what ways do you see this partnership between the academia and just the locals?
Well, you need both, you know. You need the hard science, and you need the stuff that we do as well, which is ours is qualitative type science, really. And universities, they mostly do quantitative, you know, they count and measure things.
Measure things,
Yeah, we don't
in
count and
ways.
measure things. We look at stuff.
Like you mentioned Modi before, that's
Yeah.
for a lot of people that's difficult to get their head around Modi. You know, what's the life force
Yeah.
of an organism or an ecosystem or a landscape?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you can tell whether it's alive or not. You can see it. You can hear it. Sometimes you can smell it and taste it. You know, if all of those things are there and they look good and taste good. What I mean is by the salt water. You know, if it's looking clean and tasty, then you know you're in a reasonably healthy environment. And we do get those days, but you know the kelp's missing. So we started growing kelp. We built a wet lab out of a container.
And when did this happen?
This happened in the last 5 years.
Oh, yeah, it's pretty recent, eh?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when we started, there were no community type labs, and the two students from Massey, Bo and Ella, they devised a system for growing kelp that communities can manage. So they specifically aimed it at communities.
Wow.
Which is pretty amazing, really. So other communities can do it. And what we do is we will give away what we have learnt and, you know, the knowledge from it. But we give that away for free for communities to start all up and down the coast, because it's happening all up and down the coast. It's not just in our little area of Tutukaka.
And have you had approaches from others up and down the coast asking,
we do.
hey, how can we replicate, you know, rinse and repeat what you guys are doing?
Yeah, we entertain a lot of schools. Well, Nungaru School, for example, is one, but we have schools coming from all over the north through an organisation called Papataiao, and we take them into the lab and let them have a look at what's going on, and collect some sorus tissue to get started in a tank. And twice a year they'll come, or have been coming, and I don't know whether they'll come next year, because every year is a different group of kids, you know. And teenagers, you know, just about ready to leave school. So try and give them something to aim for, I guess, if they go on to further education and go to uni. Maybe they could, you know, look at these things about the ocean.
That's interesting. So you're looking to catch them before they make up their minds about, you know, what my vocation, what direction at tertiary I want to take or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, like before career days and things.
That's
or
right.
around that time even.
Yeah.
to influence their thinking on that.
Yeah, so we have a lot of young kids, from, say, 10 years old on to teenagers and adults even. So we encourage that sort of participation from communities from all over the north, which is good.
And in 5 years, with all of that activity, have you gathered enough data, enough observation, enough whatever to show that this nursery project, because you grow the little kelp babies, and the process of how you do that is interesting too. We should talk about that. And then you reseed them back into the environment, eh?
That's right.
And so it's just interesting to know, is that reseeding really latching on? Is it taking off?
Well, it's 50-50. We've had a lot of failures,
Right.
trying to grow them and plant them, because, big swell comes in and you go out there and, Christ, you might have planted 300 bits of stone with kelp on them, and you might be able to find half a dozen.
How much as a risk can you mitigate that? I mean, you can see, the weather forecast or whatever, to a point, but how much control really?
You can't see it far enough ahead, because, these things,
It's Mother Nature.
they grow fast, but we grow them on rocks about that big, like that, and they've got to get their holdfast over that rock that they started on.
So their latchy bit.
And onto the reef. Right. It doesn't take long. They mature in about 18 months before they can reproduce. But it takes a while, so it's pretty hard to predict what the weather's going to be, and we're not going to let the weather stop us. So
it is what it is. It's
it
not
is,
like,
yeah.
Yeah.
We're
gonna be
You
able
just
to
got to
anything.
do it.
Yeah.
So the kids come into the lab and they have a look around. Some of them are interested, some of them are not. Especially the younger ones, it's pretty hard to get a 10, 12-year-old interested in a tank full of rocks.
Now, can you remind us, how did you actually collect all of the what are they called?
The tissue.
To plant on the rocks.
Okay, so we go out and we have a look at a good area of kelp, where there's some good kelp bushes, and have a look around to see if there's any tissue which shows up on the edges of the leaf of the kelp, of the Clonia radiata I'm talking about, and it's easy to see. And so we will cut a piece off. We'll cut many pieces off different plants, spread it around, because we're not trying to kill them. We want them to keep growing.
Sure do.
And
that would be defeatist.
Yeah. And then we take them back to the lab and we wipe them dry, because we're trying to wipe off what other organisms might be growing on the leaf as well. Give them a bit of a trim up, so that we are getting mostly tissue, reproductive tissue, and then we dry them off and dry them out for about 6 hours, and then after 6 hours we have a tank ready to go that's got pebbles in it and salt water, and throw all the tissue on top of this, leave them overnight, come back the next day and they've spawned all over it.
Wow.
And millions and millions of spawn. And then we have to look after them.
Right. You can't really see the spawn, or
no,
because they're so microscopic.
Yeah.
So you're just, when you say there's millions and millions, you're just like, that's what you expect is happening, even if our eyes can't see it, and that's happened later when the spawn
starts
growing on the rocks.
Which it takes about a month to be able to
see
it
with the naked eye.
With the naked eye. So luckily for us, Bo and Ella have looked at this process under a powerful microscope, and they know that it's happening.
Right.
So, and that's who we learn from. We learn from them, and we just have to do it. And we've got a little microscope of our own that we can look at these things with, and we can see it happening now as well. But it took us a couple of years to get a microscope, so that we could see it. But we saw it anyway. After about a month, you can see it growing.
Yeah, you see the results.
Yeah,
Time's an illusion, as Einstein said. So you just wait and see.
Yeah.
And then, so you get the spawns, they're on the rocks, they're ready to be seeded out. And is that when you need like a community working bee? I mean, I can't imagine it's just you and there must be helpers, kaimahi, kaitaitoko coming out with you.
Yeah, we have community people and we have hapu. A lot of hapu come and help. So we have kina clearance days where we get all the hapu to come around, especially this time of year when the kina are quite fat.
Don't you need like lightning and thunder to make, what was the indicators in the weather? There's certain ones that people, your kuia go, oh yeah, the kina will be fat now because look, and they're pointing up at the sky or they're looking out the window going, nah. Yeah, that's mātauranga right there.
Yeah, no, people have those indicators.
Gifts. Yeah, they know.
Yeah, like kōwhai and puhutakawa and different things like that. So we have kina clearance days where hapu, mostly hapu, but we do have a few Pākehā who will come along.
And that's just, the pānui goes out, the karanga goes out like word of mouth.
Yeah.
There's no real, like on social media or anything like that. We don't look.
I'm not really into social media, but there are people who will say, come out and we'll get a feed of kina. So we go out and we get a customary permit so that we can take a lot of kina. And from this area that we're planting at the moment, we've removed ourselves, we've removed about 5,000 kina from this tiny area, which is probably twice the size of this room.
Wow. That's concentrated.
And we're constantly removing them.
Yeah.
But it's getting, the kelp is loving it because the kelp is starting to grow back just with the removals. And then with us planting as well, it's we've got an area about as big as this room that we've planted and is growing back because of the removals. But you've got to be careful why are we removing them. Of course, we're removing them so that the kelp gets a chance to grow. But what are you going to do with them? You can't just trash these kina. They're a taonga species. They're a food source. Yep. So we've got to find ways to use them that's beneficial to us and is not just full-on destruction.
Yeah. We eat, the kina. The shells, do they have any value like calcium, or can you grind them up? Or what do we do?
Yeah, well, the shells are lime, of course.
Lime.
Yeah.
Good source of lime.
Yeah, good for your garden, calcium for your garden.
Okay, so is that how we're using the shells? Are we distributing them mostly for people's gardens again?
Yeah.
Back to the gardens?
All the shells going into the garden.
Yeah.
I put the shells in a drum of water until it all breaks down and then crush it all up and just pour it on the garden.
Oh, wow. How long does that process take? Here's a tip for us.
That takes a while.
Yeah. Oh, but
couple of months.
Hey, there's no effort. You stick it in and you leave the barrel.
Yeah,
you just let it sit there. So there's no effort for that.
No, not really. I mean, 2 months and it's ready to go in the garden. If you're doing it in a barrel. But if you just stick it straight on the garden, works straight away. I've got a friend up the coast who does his own kina removals in his own spare time. He lives right on the coast. And, he's removed about 10,000 kina over the last 5 years. It's all gone into his garden. He doesn't eat them.
Yeah.
But he grows this amazing, huge garden of leafy vegetables.
I'm starting to think there's another app that we need to create, which is, I've got kina shells, come get them.
Yeah.
Come get kina, something catchy. Someone please think up an app.
Yeah, well, you could do the same thing.
I would love to get my garden, because the clay soil, kiripaka soil,
Yeah,
it needs a lot of reconstruction and you have to work it before
it needs
stuff
breaking up and aerating and nutrients added.
That's what
it's got a lot of nutrients in it, but you can add more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This whole conversation too reminds me about, that whole dynamic between the moana and the whenua. There's so many relationships. It's like the manu who fly out to the ocean and then they come back and they redistribute the nutrients of the ocean on
That's
land when
right.
they poop everywhere.
Yeah.
So when people, land lovers, are thinking, I'm not really concerned about, what's going on in the ocean, well, we should be more concerned.
We should be, yeah. Been doing lately because we had to do another survey just recently for MPI, and we had to clear an area of kina with some divers, and MPI paid for the divers to do this just as an experiment, really, to see what the hell can be done about the kina barrens. We took about 250 kilos of kina a day, but the divers smashed thousands to try and clear an area. So this is to see what can be done, because it's a massive problem, you see. And like I said, the area, it's all the way from Wellington to North Cape. So that's what we did. So it was just a 6-day exercise, but, smashed a lot of kina.
But here, we've figured out
Yeah,
you don't have to do it that way.
No,
you can do it in a
and
way.
it's not going to work that way anyway.
Exactly.
Because the area, this is only my personal opinion, because you've got scientists looking at this, and MPI, of course. There's no money to do it. I mean, you've got to pay these people to go and smash these kina. Where's the money going to come from?
It seems a real wasteful approach when there is value in kina, obviously.
Yeah, there can be. There's better things you can do with them.
Yeah,
than just smash them.
Yeah. So we've figured that out.
Yeah, and it's not hard to figure out. I mean, if you're a kina lover, like I am, it's not hard to figure out. All you have to do is grow them on. But even that, you have to go and harvest all these kina off the kina barrens, which is more costly than smashing them, because when you're smashing them, you're just smashing them on the kina barren, right? But if you're harvesting them, it's going to cost a lot of money as well. But for people like me, I can go and harvest as many as I like within the law, and with customary permit and all those tools that are available, and I could grow them on for myself, or my hapu or whānau.
And so we could take them away. We have them for kai.
Yeah.
Number one, and number two, the shells are good for the garden.
Yeah. And the other alternative is to actually grow them on.
And growing them.
Yeah.
In other places.
Yeah, it doesn't take long. Apparently, it only takes, no, not in other places, in tanks, in an aquarium.
So why would we grow them in an artificial environment as opposed to out in the natural environment?
Because there's not enough natural environment to grow them on. Because if you take, say, 10,000 kina from here, and you go and put them in a good bit of kelp, they're just going to destroy the kelp.
Yeah.
So that's not the answer.
We're trying to get the best of both worlds.
So
there isn't a balance to be struck out in the environment, though, between the kelp and the kina. That's just...
No, I tell you, it's not pretty. Just a little bit that I've seen, and we've had people swim all the way from Paparoa Creek all the way up to Second Gable, and are quite devastated themselves when they come out of the water as to how bad the problem is, how serious the problem is.
And when you say bad and serious, you mean the kina have just overtaken?
The barrens are huge, yeah. And some places we may not be able to get them back, rehabilitate them. That's how bad it is. So it's no good going and dumping a whole lot of kina on a good patch of kelp, because they'll just destroy it.
Yeah, a good location for on the coast somewhere.
And if you go and have a dive in that kelp, those good patches of kelp, there's already kina in there that are doing quite well.
Right, yeah.
But, you know, so you've got this table here, which is a kina barren, and you've got kelp here and kelp at that end. The whole barren is full of kina, and then up here in the kelp is full of kina. So they're mowing it down,
Right.
Going both ways.
And but that's because we can't strike a balance because the fish are depleted
That's
in
right.
numbers. So
Yeah.
to really strike a balance, which is ultimately what we would want, you know, but in the short term we're just trying to manage it as best we can. But ultimately we'd like the fish that are predating on all of that kina spore spat. What is it called again? The spawning
The spawn,
stuff.
yeah.
Spawn. The fish that predate on that eat that, they need to come back in numbers so
That's
that
right.
everything is, optimal in the ecosystem, species-wise.
Bringing back some balance. So it's not an easy, quick fix. It's a
Not at all.
long-term fix.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, but it can be done. We just have to have the right tools in place and the right law, which is our customary law, which is, you know, rahui, mataitai. Mataitai is looking like a good thing because you can include the whole community in the mataitai. With rahui, you're trying to get people to, you're trying to restrict people with rahui. And even with 186A, you're restricting people taking certain species. But with mataitai, the whole community and the hapu can manage it.
So what is the difference between, if you can describe the mataitai, is that like a reserve of some kind?
Yeah, it's a mataitai it's a bit of a reserve, but it's an area where there is that is designated for mataitai. I don't want to call it a reserve, but I think it is called a reserve.
But
legally.
the difference between a conventional reserve and a mataitai is...
Well, the community can manage a mataitai.
including the people can take from it. It's not strictly off limits. There's
Well,
some...
if you're monitoring it properly, you can decide, and the community can decide when they're going to take and how much they're going to take.
Right, yeah. Because
Yeah.
that's been one of the things that's made reserves problematic, is it's like a strict no-take and no one, you know,
Yeah,
and it doesn't really recognise the human element
No.
in the environment, because we are
Yeah.
part of the environment.
Yeah.
Communities exist, you know, with the
Yeah.
environment. So
Yeah.
we need to be factored in that social, you know, impact and the culture and everything else.
There's not many marine reserves in New Zealand anyway.
Wow. You reckon there ought to be more? I reckon, but
I think there should
that's just
be
me.
a lot of small ones,
Right.
like Lee, for example.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. And what do you think is the reason why there aren't more, even though there ought to be?
Commercial fishing.
As a lobby force, the commercial
Yeah, the lobby
fish-
force of the
fishers.
commercial fishermen. As you can see what's happening now in the Gulf, the minister has just allowed ring netting in the Gulf
Yeah,
in
I
a reserve.
I'm so confused about where the logic is. In terms of if environmental protection was the standard for decision making, and it ought to be, it would be really good actually, just a little segue, the constitution of Aotearoa, I reckon we need to put the environment, like embed it, entrench that as a imperative and a priority when we, you know,
Yeah.
write up our constitution.
Yeah.
We haven't got a written constitution that people can understand. It's
No,
all a
we-
dog's
we-
breakfast
we
all
have-
over the show,
Yeah,
and
we
our
have
values are
lots
wrong.
of little bits, little bits of legislation.
Yeah, here
there,
and there, but people can't make
which
heads
they
or tail of it.
keep
really.
changing anyway, and can invent more.
Yeah, yeah. And Te
Un-
Tiriti, of
under-
course, is an
under
entrenched.
urgency.
So,
So
yeah. So that's something that
That's-
could be done, a bigger picture, but
Yeah.
also big picture is this commercial situation, like you're saying.
Yeah,
I'm not
so-
sure how we're going to attack that.
that's right. I mean, you know, the minister has just undone many years of work
Yeah, to
by
get us
allowing
to
these
this great place.
fishing methods in reserves, and even in our 186A, he allowed Danish seining and bottom trawling.
in the Gulf.
No, it was in our 186A out on the coast here.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
I'm confused. I don't see how any of this really, how it can be allowed. It's just all incongruent. It's
Well,
just all
he's all powerful.
opposite
and
and-
he can just with the stroke of a pen allow that.
Yeah, so there's the motivation for people to engage in civics. Something as simple as voting. Voting isn't a panacea, but it helps a bit because you just can't tell. The next government might just be, oh, here's the new boss, same as the old boss. You really don't know if
No, you
politics
don't.
in that
Yeah.
way is working. So it tells us we need some different kind of action by the ordinary folks of
Yeah,
Aotearoa besides
yeah.
just voting. That's not going to cut it. Going to select
No.
committees, obviously that's not cutting it because we make our interventions to select committees on all sorts of bills.
Yeah.
And they just get rocketed through anyway, despite us. So, you got to start wondering, well, if the definition of a democracy is governance, by, of, and for the people, do we even have a democracy anymore where the will of the people is being ignored? It raises some big questions
Yeah.
just talking about kelp nursery
Yeah.
to me. It's
Yeah.
really fascinating.
Well, I think there is a solution to it, and that one of the solutions is a mataitai in a area, and that's what we're working on at the moment, not as a trust, but with a group of hapu, which we've also included some of the community, is working on getting this mataitai in place so that the community can control the harvesting and the protection of species
Right. That
by
sounds
monitoring.
like a great opportunity. How many
Yeah.
mataitai are operating in Aotearoa, do you know?
There's a few, but and I don't know how they all are governed, but we have to make sure that we govern ours the right way.
Kia ora. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Whatever that is, I mean, it's got to be by either
Tika pono
consent or
aroha,
consensus.
just- yeah,
Work
basic.
out what the rules are for the mataitai and get it in place. It's quite hard and takes quite a long time to get them in place.
Yeah, there's one of the barriers. I was just going to
Yeah.
ask, why haven't we got more of those then? If common sense tells us that'd be a
Yeah.
very good tool to protect and regenerate our marine environment.
Yeah, that's what we need.
That's what we need.
That's one of the things we need. There's many things that we need, but
Do you-
that's a
does-
good way to get the community involved in looking after their own bit of coastline.
Yes. What would it take to move that along faster? I don't want to say
Well,
fast
it
track.
takes
to get the mataitai.
what it
up.
takes is a group of people, which is what we've got at the moment.
Right, check.
Yeah, and it's just a lot of work. It took about 5 years to get this 186A in place, and mataitais take longer. But because we've got the 186 already there, we should be able to get the mataitai in quicker.
Oh, okay. It allows you
be
to
able to.
slipstream somehow
Yeah, I don't know
process or whatever.
how you'd slipstream it.
together. Is there
Maybe
anything
you
that
should be one of the members of this group, this mataitai
Look,
group.
I was just going to say, if you could wave a magic wand and construct your dream team to put this mataitai together with all due haste, not hastily, but all due haste, what would your karanga to the audience be like to help to tautoko or to do something to
Well,
assist?
We've had two public meetings about it.
Right.
People are there's quite a few people on board with it,
Okay.
and we with the 186A we had a couple of public meetings about that, and it was about, I think it was about 60-40 split. People against it, people for it, but we got it through.
Oh, yeah.
So it might have been
doable.
the numbers might have been a bit different, but they were more interested in the mataitai, these people,
Okay.
because they can have a say in it.
Yeah.
The public, I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, we would choose those people. I mean, It's not just anybody can just willy-nilly come into it. We'd choose some people who could manage something.
This is the
like that.
importance of governance here.
Yes. Yeah.
Decision making.
Yeah.
Yeah, ultimately.
Yeah.
Okay, so that sounds to me like it's something that, you know, the locals, the communities around here who have a stake in the well-being of the marine environment need to keep our radar out for how we can, contribute something towards this aspiration.
Yeah, to making it happen
Make
quickly.
it happen.
And
Yeah.
just making it happen. So, you know, so the local community is good, the people that live around the shores of the area that we want to establish the mataitai. So it would include a general community, then of course hapu. You know, we'd probably have to include iwi in that too, although iwi have got a different agenda. Which is economics.
They should have the whole spectrum of well-being tohu, though, in mind, you know. They should.
Yeah.
You know, indicators of well-being aren't just
Yeah.
economics. They, you know, in their strategic plans, if you look at them, they've
Yeah.
got all sorts, you know, cultural, environmental,
Yeah.
you know, not just economic.
I don't think we should be looking at the economics of the mataitai of allowing commercial fishing, because it's a completely different animal, commercial fishing, than trying to look after a place for the local community and the local
Oh,
hapu.
yeah, totally, night and day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's all about money. It's not about conservation whatsoever.
Yeah.
No commercial fishing that I know of is about conservation. It's you know, when
By
you're-
nature, the
when
word
you're-
industry is
yeah.
extractive.
When you're a
But-
commercial fisherman, you want maximum catch and maximum money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole thing about capitalism just drives the
Yeah,
industry to
that's right.
prioritise profits. That's an interesting discussion. We must have a discussion about this in another podcast. The whole thing about,
Yeah.
you know, we're asking for companies, corporations, capitalists to like have a paradigm shift in their value systems, their culture and their approach, and yet the legislative infrastructure goads them towards doing the exact opposite
Yeah.
of what we're asking. So you've got these two forces, you know, butting heads. Are we really surprised that we're not making headway, you know, in the right direction? We
Yeah.
shouldn't be surprised. And
Yeah.
that, you know, tells us, okay, so we have to somehow change the legislation. This is interesting because I went to a Pacific judges training workshop in Fiji last year. And one of the themes coming out from those judges were, you know, we can only do what we can within the law.
Yeah.
So if the law is hostile to the environment,
Yeah.
they're going, come on.
Yeah.
It's up to the citizenry. We need the help of the citizenry to change the law
Yeah.
so that it is more favouring towards environmental protection.
Yeah.
And then as judges, we can do our job. But our hands are tied. And one of the things is, you know, it's actually in the law that corporations must prioritise profit making and dividends and returns for their shareholders. That's like, if you don't do that, you're actually being irresponsible as
Yeah.
like a CEO or,
Yeah.
you know, directors on a board of a company.
Yeah.
So you've got to address that, number one. And number two is that you can't jail like directors and CEOs.
Yeah. That's right.
If you really want to change, have a paradigm shift,
Yeah.
you want to have law that says we're going to put individuals in jail. Some heads are going to roll. I mean, figuratively, not, you know, literally.
I think things are changing a little bit, you know, because New Zealand has to trade with the rest of the world. And the rest of the world has a lot of things, like Europe, for example. They have a lot of environmental things
standards
happening in
are
Europe
improving.
and standards.
Yes.
And if we don't meet those standards, we won't be trading with them.
Yeah, we
They,
need.
they won't accept
Good point.
our produce.
Yeah, good
Because if it doesn't meet their standards, they're not going to buy it.
So we have to get our skates on.
Yeah, and there are people in the country who are getting their skates on because they can see what's this happening slowly. So
It seems like our government's direction, though, is the antithesis of what the trends are happening over in the European Union then. It seems like the European Union standards are improving and New Zealand's standards are declining.
well, yeah, there's some people in New Zealand who are trying to improve them to keep the trade routes and the, well, not so much the trade, but just keeping the trade
The relationships.
relationships open. You know, it's a whole other thing.
It's a
isn't
hot
it?
mess, really.
Yeah.
So we just
Yeah.
do what we can in the
Yeah, I
meantime
mean,
at a community level.
all I
and
can do is grow kelp.
campaigning. Yeah. Oh no, that's awesome. What you're doing. Was there anything else you wanted to say about that project before we?
Okay, so it's not
Moved
just a
on
kelp project. Okay, so it's a whole, like you mentioned birds before, seabirds.
Yeah, that whole relationship between
Yeah,
the
that
whenua and the
whole-
moana, and that's really
Yeah.
critical. The
So-
transference of nutrients from the ocean to the land,
Yeah.
because birds fly over and they poop.
That's right. So
For one thing.
So we have to look after the birds
The
as
manu.
well, because the
Children.
birds are having to go further and further away now for feed, because we've caught all their feed.
Yeah.
And the inshore sardine or pilchard industry is a good example of that. Like a lot of it's been heavily fished, and so where are the birds going to get their kai from? You know, and people who follow birds are noticing that, say, the mutton birds, for example, are having to go further and further for food.
And even when they do come
Yeah.
back with something in their gullet,
Well, they're
it might be the
noticing-
wrong thing.
Yeah,
Plastics.
plastic, and having to go so far for food that they don't get back to their chicks.
Oh, they don't even get back. They don't
No.
even make it back.
Well, not in time.
Yeah.
The chicks have starved to death before they get back.
Yeah.
So
Brutal.
a good site is northern seabird something. They study all the birds that come around close, like at the Pornights and all that. You know,
Again, you know,
They keep an eye on them.
Yes, I'm thinking there's a whole lot of mahi that needs doing,
Yeah.
and there's a whole lot of people out there in our communities. Some of them must have some spare capacity
Yeah.
to help, and it's not just mahi as in drudgery work. Some of this mahi is it really uplifts us to
Yeah.
be working out in the
Yeah.
environment. You feel like you're giving something back. You're learning about different things in nature. You know, it's really soul satisfying work.
Yeah.
And it reconnects us with our mātauranga as well. You're working with,
Well, that's
traditional
right, yeah.
knowledge, expertise. This isn't just, fuzzy knowledge. It's actually Māori science, native science. So you get a whole lot of benefits from your giving. And so that's what I would encourage people to do is to connect up with, organisations
Yeah.
and people like yourself, and just see how, ask how can I participate in this mahi that needs doing.
Yeah,
So is
well-
there a local like project with the
That
manu
people can
and
be,
that
with the
people
manu,
can
there's
tap into?
there's one at Tutukaka. There's some guys who take people out to see the seabirds when they come, and then there's another one at Nguru who they are bird watchers. They go and do a count on certain places and certain days to see how many different birds they can see, like especially seabirds and all those birds that live up the river.
Can you be just a layperson and rock up
yeah.
and help, or do you need to be
Yeah,
an
yeah.
ornithology kind of a
No, you just
nerd
somebody.
who loves manu?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Who loves
cool.
them.
See, you just have to love manu. I could do that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
And there's Guy Bowden.
Yeah. Okay.
He Tawapo coastal natives.
Ooh.
He's trying to bring back the oi.
That is
You can go and talk to Guy anytime.
The oi is a
It's a
it's got a
petrel.
name. Petrel, thank you.
Yeah,
Petrel.
little grey petrel. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's plenty of manu that need our help. That need
Yeah, a lot of
saving.
them. I mean, rats are the biggest problem for these birds that nest on shore. There's also, you know, people can just do their own mahi if they've got a creek running through their place. Is look after it.
Right, and
Look
ways
after
to
the
look
water.
after your creek is like if it needs some like shade,
Shade,
plant some trees
yeah.
just running down the creek to give the creek some shade.
Yep.
And make sure the whatever waterways or puna
Yeah.
springs that feed that creek, they're doing. I don't know how you
Well,
can help
you
a
know,
puna.
keeping them clear
But-
and keeping them clean.
Yeah, looking out for any invasive weeds that might choke up the
Well,
water flow.
especially the invasive weeds.
Yeah.
I've got
So
huge
much.
problems with invasive weeds.
Oh dear.
And, you know, the Tutukaka Harbour has got quite a big catchment, and some of it's good. I'm trying to repair mine after, you know, lots of deforestation over the last 100 years and farming, dodgy farming methods,
Yeah.
you know, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't do any farming on our place anymore, but just trying to keep up with the weeds is a big job.
On its own.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope people are starting to, you know, see that there's a lot that we can each do to contribute
Yeah,
to rebuilding our environment, the marine environment as well.
yeah. Well, you know, the marine environment is not going to get better if we don't look after our catchment areas.
Absolutely,
Because
yeah.
the amount of silt coming down, say, using Tutukaka Harbour as an example again, the amount of silt coming into the Tutukaka Harbour every time it rains, you can, like if it's a heavy rain, you can see it out to 3 miles.
Oh my gosh.
Especially if you say, you know, up at the place that you know which is the lookout,
Right.
and you look down towards Taihururu while it's raining, there's just brown water all the way.
And the way to help mitigate all that runoff is again what planting more trees along
along the edges of the river,
rivers,
cleaning up all the creeks that go into it, planting them.
planting, and more
Yeah,
planting.
It's filtering. Yeah, it's
Species
'cause
that
of
filter.
All the filtering is left to the mangrove.
Yeah.
And the mangrove are moving further and further down the river because the mud is just
Which they like.
well that's
thrive
yeah
in
that's
the
that's
muddy,
what they're
silty.
trying what the mangroves are trying to filter, and they just can't keep up.
Wow.
So
So the filtering plants that we would plant is
well, a lot of
Harakeke is
the,
one,
you know, the wiwi, the oi. Is it oi? No, it's just oi. The bird is the oi.
the bird is the oi, and there's a
Yeah.
plant called oi.
There's a
Hey,
plant
well,
called
there you
the
go.
oi, which is, you know, all the little inanga can get in amongst plants like that and lay their eggs.
Oh yeah, for the whitebait, for those who love
Yep.
whitebait.
So that's the other thing, making sure that the whitebait can actually get up the creek.
See, these are all indicator species again. If the
Yeah.
whitebait are good, it's an indicator. You know, one thing I would love to bring back is frogs, but do we have many native frogs? I'm a
Well,
bit
we
confused
do,
about that.
but you know, who was it that said goodbye, Freddie?
That's a chocolate frog, isn't it? The Freddy frog, the
He,
chocolate Freddy
he was
frog.
talking about Hochstetter's frog. I think it was Hochstetter's frog, which is protected in a place in the South Island, which is going to become a mine.
Oh. Being facetious again about the destruction, of mining, and then the species of the frog disappears. Oh yeah, that's
I have frogs at my
despicable.
place. They are golden bell frogs. So they're bright green and they have gold around here.
Oh,
and
yeah.
there. They're not a native.
Not a
but,
native though. Yeah. Do we have many? Because when I was young, I remember hearing frog song, like behind our house. They would be there in like the wetlands and
Yeah.
whatever. Wetlands are another good topic of
Wetland,
cleaning out. Speaking of cleaning our waters, but then towards my later teenage years, they just went quiet.
Disappeared.
And reflecting back on that, I thought, well, I don't know if they're natives, but to me, the frogs, healthy frog songs, I think of it as a good indicator of a healthy environment, but that might be in other countries. I don't know
No,
if
it's
it would
here
be
too.
that
I mean, if
here,
you can
but
hear
other
frogs, you know that something good is happening.
that was my intuitive feeling,
yeah.
but that might be a good place to sort of leave it.
Sure.
But with one final word from you, if there was a message you'd like to give to whānau listening and that, just to round up our conversation today, which I thought was super awesome. Thank you very much. What would you?
Yeah, thanks.
What's something
Thanks,
you'd like to
Catherine.
say?
Well, I would just like to say to our whānau and our communities to get involved. Get involved in any of these things that are going to help our mokopuna for the future with the moana and our catchment areas, our wetlands. Get involved. There's plenty of places to get involved and make contribution. Doesn't have to be financial, but it just has to be, in person.
Kind.
In kind, yeah.
Ātinana, yeah. Tama tū, tama ora, tama noho, tama mate. You get active and involved, you'll be all right. But if you're just sitting around, you're probably not going to do very well. Neither will your environment.
No.
So thanks very much, Hamish. It was lovely. It was a privilege and a pleasure having you. And maybe we can get you back at some later time.
We can talk about some wetland maybe next time. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you too,
All right.
Catherine. Really appreciate
Mā
it.
te wā. Kia ora.
Kia ora.